And welcome. So, I am really excited to kick off this discussion today with two of my favorite people from Salesforce. Uh, I'd like to say brilliant hello to Nathalie Scardino and Emma Richards, who are joining us today for a discussion on really all things empowerment. I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation for a couple of reasons. Mainly, I've been in the pre-briefing call, but hopefully you'll all join and see where I'm coming from. But just before I kick off, what I want to do is I just want to ask Nathalie and Emma just to share a little bit about who they are, why we're on this call, like kind of what you do at Salesforce. So I'll kick off and maybe I'll ask Emma to go first.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me. So my name is Emma Richards. I'm a senior solution engineer at Salesforce, which means I kind of work in our pre-sales side of the business. But I guess why I'm here today is because I'm also part of one of our, we call them equality groups, but one of our employee resource groups, Boldforce, which is our group that focuses on those of like African and Caribbean heritage. So I have various roles at different, regional levels and so on in the group, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later on. But that's sort of my night job at Salesforce, but I definitely get paid to be a solution engineer.
Perfect. And Nathalie?
Hi, everyone. So I manage recruiting for the global distribution organization, which is really focused on the go-to-market sales, pre-sales, post-sales environment. And I'm also co-leading our racial equality and justice people pillar, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about today in this session. So great to be here, Ashley, with you, and of course, Emma, with you.
Fantastic. Well, the first thing I want to kick off with is I was doing a little bit of background research, and I know both of you have been at Salesforce almost coming up to 10 years, which in technology is a long time. I mean, if you think about companies out there, like most of them haven't even been around that long. So I suppose my starting point would be like, why? What's kept you there? Tell us, what's the secret sauce?
I would joke if we were in the office, it's the snacks, it's the free snacks. It just keeps you there, honestly. But we're not in the office. But it really is the culture, and it sounds so cheesy. And I speak to friends that don't work at Salesforce, and they genuinely think I work for a cult because I will just keep talking about a company and the job that I do and how much I love it and how much it's kept me there. And it's the culture, the people. I've had quite a few different job hats along the way, which has also kept it fresh. But for me, it really is the culture. And I know how cheesy that sounds, but it's so true.
Yeah, I'm going to go the cheesy route too, because it is that the values live up to the culture. It is a very, very values-driven based company. And every day, you just work with phenomenal people across the rest of the world. And my friends also think, what is this place that you work in? It can't just be the snacks. And of course it isn't after 9 years. It is that sense of belonging, of community inside the walls of Salesforce and outside. And the fact that somebody asked me this the other day, 9 years, what is it? And there's just so much innovation and change. And to Emma's point, I've had a couple of roles over the last years as well that, help you flex your skills, or you get to meet different people, whether it is geographically or different experiences. And so just the pace, it's dynamic.
Got it. It sounds a bit like an advert though, so let's dig deeper on that when we come to it. Like you're doing a good job on that front. So
Actually.
So if I dig in then, so 2020 has been an absolutely crazy year. On top of a global pandemic, we've had a massive movement across the industry for fight for better equality and equity amongst the Black community in particular. And I know Salesforce has a particular interesting kind of story and angle to that. I know there's a whole task force that's set up, but interestingly, it's not just run by the employee resource group or Boldforce. So Nathalie, can you tell us a little bit more about what that is and why and how?
Absolutely. I mean, to your point, 2020 is unlike any year, certainly in my career and life. And in response to many of the crises that we've been facing, including the racial injustice crises, about 3 months ago now, after the murder of George Floyd, we created a task force, the Racial Equality and Justice Task Force, focused on kind of 4 core pillars, including people, philanthropy, purchasing, and policy. And for the people pillar specifically, which Emma and I are both involved in, this is a group across the organization, different levels, different experiences, generational differences, who've come together and really focused on what is our strategy from a talent lifecycle perspective, for attracting, hiring, developing, retaining URM talent. And so that's been a key area of focus for us. And Emma, I know you've been part of that as well.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. It's a really great point you make, Ashley, in terms of people thinking, leave it to the employee resource groups or ethnic minorities in this case to kind of fix the problem. And what I've loved about this task force is exactly Nathalie's point, in that you've got many different people across the business coming together, but there's also an appreciation that you do need Black people in the room. Like, you need people in the room that you're talking about these people like careers and lives. Like, you need that representation in the room, but it's not up to the employee resource groups to fix it. And that's been lovely. It's been such a lovely way of us coming together, using a lot of the methods and methodologies that we as Salesforce use in terms of making sure that how we run the business is how we've kind of put all our effort into making sure this task force is as efficient as possible. And it just keeps going, just keeps building, and especially around the world as well. As you can imagine, we've got sort of different pockets around the globe doing all the same aim and same trajectory, but just slightly different roles.
And where's the task force going? Like, because I've got 2 questions. It's like, okay, so we've brought people together, but what's the output? What's going to happen? And I suppose then, how does it happen? What's the vision for it? Where does it go?
I think, as Emma said, it is. What I love about this, maybe more than other times, is that there's a lot of action behind it. And so it's very explicit about our deliverables. And one of them is increasing our ratios and representations of Black employees. In fact, the leadership piece is that we're making a commitment to double the US representation of Black employees in VP plus positions by the end of 2023. And so a lot of our focus is that accountability now that we have goals that we're working towards as well. So that, I feel, is different, because when I hear the word task force, I'm like, there's got to be a million task forces going on inside of the company. This is different. I almost feel like task force is not. Emma, let's think of a new word at some point after this, where we love a new acronym, but it's a very important body of work, and I love that we have actions against each of our methodologies.
Got it. And I know, so I was talking to Molly Ford, who looks after a lot of the diversity efforts within Salesforce, about, I suppose, empowerment, because, again, to kind of some of Emma's points, we interact as Color and Tech with a number of folks from different employee resource groups. And one of the key frustrations a lot of the time is they're not actually empowered to do much. It's kind of like, great, do the business a favor and solve all of our problems for us, and we'll say thanks and occasionally change the food in the canteen for you. So, we want to go a bit further. So I suppose, one of the things that Molly said, well, actually, you get a level of financial empowerment at Boldforce. You actually get to, I suppose, put your money where your mouth is and decide what your priorities are. So Emma, tell us a bit more about Boldforce, how it happens, what does Boldforce even mean?
That is a great question. So Boldforce, the bold in Boldforce, it stands for like the Black Organization for Leadership and Development. We are Salesforce. We love a force. That's pretty much where the force bit comes from. That's why I think also task force is probably going to stay. Sorry, Nathalie. But the Boldforce, and we've got, it's one of 12 equality groups or employee resource groups that we have here at Salesforce, and they're all about people that identify maybe with certain characteristics coming together, but also coming together with their allies. Again, that's another sort of difference that I've seen in certain other employee resource groups. And you're completely right about the financial aspect. the groups are, I think of them, I run them like a business in that respect. They, you have money coming in, money coming out naturally. You have leadership teams, you have volunteers that, that help out, especially running things like events and so on. But then also, if you're part of the leadership team, like I am, for example, on our global hub, there are, times when you come in and you have roles. For example, I'm part of our international task force, for example. But there's an awful lot of structure. It's one thing I love about the groups. You've got volunteers, clearly, people doing this, and I mentioned it as my night job at the beginning of the call. But there's structure. There's a whole office of equality in terms of the way in which we look at equality here at Salesforce. There's someone who I'd kind of term as almost like our mum, Natasha, shout out. And she essentially is the mum of all of those equality groups across the world. So it's incredible that that structure is there and that they want those equality groups or those employee resource groups to succeed.
And I suppose a lot of people potentially today will be viewing this challenge, thinking about how do you get to that structure? Like where do I begin? Like what? Like wow, there are some organizations that are far ahead and they have structures, budget, teams, organizations within organizations, and we encounter many who are still at the very beginning of that journey and thinking about, okay, well, where do I begin? What would be some of the lessons or some of the things that you would share from the benefits of that structure that you talk about to maybe people who are in organizations where they're thinking about where to start on some of these things actually?
Sure. So, I mean, the structures definitely come over time. 3 odd years ago, I used to joke that our closest Boldforce to us here in London, based here in London, was in New York, because we didn't have a Boldforce based out here in EMEA, let alone in the UK. And so I helped set that up over here in EMEA. So it's got some learnings in that respect. And if anyone is sitting there going, I'd love to do this, but this sounds terrifying, you are correct. It is terrifying. And it will remain terrifying for a little while. But I would 100% always recommend, do not do it alone. Don't do it alone. Find people. Again, it doesn't always have to be other Black people. For example, if you're looking at an employee resource group like that, invest in your allies, the power of allies, and we might pop back to that later on. It's so important. And find like a sponsor, like an exec sponsor, someone that will champion the group with you, but someone high up in the organization, for example, that will be your champion, that will be the person that on your company meeting calls will be like, this group is being set up, you should get involved. Like, you need those people to kind of help you in those beginning times. But I would also recommend finding other groups in other companies, or at least those heads in other companies, and just chatting to them, because again, safety in numbers, just people important. But it is terrifying, but you can do it.
And Nathalie, how does that manifest on some of the conversations you have? Because I suppose for those who don't know in our audience, that you are based in the USA as well. So yeah. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Emma's saying here about not going it alone. And I think about the impact on the work that we're doing right now and how much of it has been like grassroots movements from our ERG groups. So much of it is a testament to the hard work there. But it does start from the top. It starts with the leaders setting the tone. And equality, Emma referenced earlier, like 4 years ago now, we hired Tony Profit as the head of equality. It's now also the head of recruiting, and we combined those two areas together. And, in the spirit of our values, which I talked about earlier, a lot of it is setting that tone from the leaders and empowering. You talked about empowerment, Ashley, a lot. And I think, to be part of an ERG a group, or to really take on some of these social challenges, you need that sponsorship and advocacy from the highest level in the company as well. And that's super important.
It also sounds super tiring. And this is kind of like a question that's super important, because obviously this year, I mean, from my own personal perspective, Color and Tech has never been so busy. I think on one level, we've seen a lot of the stuff that's happened, across the pond in the US and over here and in the UK. And on a personal level, that's tolling and taxing and traumatizing and all the words that you can imagine. And then, from my perspective, it's also like, okay, so it's, I feel it. And then it's now cut through and it's kind of like, well, actually my friends and those other people that I wasn't talking to about it feel it too. And there's kind of like that. And then, from my perspective, there's also a third thing, which is kind of like, oh, and this is my job and my work. And it's kind of like there's that third layer of this. And I imagine both you yourselves will feel like that in many ways, because it's, you can't necessarily just disconnect yourself. And I suppose, yeah, how do you feel about that kind of like that burnout thing? I know one of the things that we were talking about previously was, would we recommend this to people to do? Is it something that we would say? Is it something that we're born into, or is it just something that we found ourselves doing? I mean, how would you say you think about these things in terms of mental health and burnout and I suppose ultimately what would you say to other people who are thinking about some of these topics as well?
It's a really great question, and particularly pertinent as well with what's gone on over the last couple of months in particular. The same advice I give to other people that are looking to set up groups like this, both inside and outside of Salesforce, is that you need to look after yourself. Like, you need to make sure you're looking after yourself. If that means you need to take a step back and focus on your day job, because you can't be in an employee resource group if you don't have a job, then to do that, for example. But your mental health is crucial, because it's so easy to lose yourself in the work that we do. And we obviously were striving towards a point where things like employee resource groups won't be as needed as they are at the moment. But that's still a while off. And if you're the sort of person that you probably would be that step forward and want to get involved in one of these groups, you'll want to complete it. Like, you'll want to get to the pinnacle of what we're all looking to get towards. But you've got to understand that it takes time. You need to pace yourself. Your mental health is really important. Keep yourself in a job as well. And I keep coming back to this point, but people really don't do it alone. Speak to people, talk to people, get advice. People have done it before. Get as many different opinions as possible. But over the last couple of months, I would say to anyone that's gone through this period in the last couple of months with that sort of responsibility, make sure you're taking time for yourself. It's really important.
Yeah, and I suppose maybe from Natalie's point of view as well, how have you all thought about this in terms of supporting employees, supporting resource groups, supporting the structures of those pillars that you spoke about in terms of actually ultimately the work that you're trying to try to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, burnout, is real. And as Emma points out, the last couple of months has had so much impact on many. And often I think, the most kind of underrepresented groups are left holding that burden, as we talked about a little bit up front. So from a leadership point of view, or the racial equality and justice work that's being done, I think it is incredibly important, as Emma says, that you take care of your mental health and well-being first, and that you step in and out as you see fit. And then from an ally perspective, we talk a lot about active allies and what that means. And so if you are managing, teams of people, or you're a leader in the company, how are you making sure that your employees are feeling safe, are not having to deal with, trauma inside and outside of the work? How are you alleviating some of that pressure? How are you showing up for employee resource groups and for underrepresented minorities in work, out of work? Where are you spending dollars? How are you serving the community? Who are you advocating for? How are you creating psychological safety and all of those things? So I love, again, what Emma said, which is don't go it alone. And that is kind of core to the journey that we're on right now.
And I suppose my one kind of thing, and I might interject, I mean, what do you think's been one of the most kind of, I suppose, impactful kind of things that Salesforce has done in order to do some of those things that you've spoken about? What's the one thing that you yeah, damn, we're getting that right. I love that. I tell people about that, those friends which are you've joined this cult called Salesforce, but what is it that they comment on? What's that thing that you think the org's doing kind of really well?
Yeah, I mean, Emma, I'd love your perspective too. I mean, there's a few things. Number one is the fact that we're having the conversation. We're having conversations at every single level of the organization. And then, going back to the racial injustice actions that we're taking, things like the creation of a program called the Warm Line, which is led by Jacqueline Chapman in our organization, who's a fabulous executive. And this is an employee advocacy program for underrepresented groups. So, you can talk about navigating your career, how to negotiate, if you're feeling, a particular way or burnt out or frustrated, because it is about belonging. We talk a lot about attraction and hiring, which is great. And that is my core domain, talent acquisition. And we've certainly done a lot of work there and need to continue. But in light of 2020, especially, I feel now there's more of an emphasis on belonging, on retention, on what does it, how does your company show up in moments where you need them the most? Emma, I don't know.
I love that. But that's why we named today belonging. Like, for us, it's a sense of, it's that real sense of belonging that moves kind of beyond where the conversation has been previously. It's for us, that's where we really are driving to. I'm not sure, Emma, if you had any other comments to add to that.
Very much, like, I completely agree with Nathalie, and but for me, it's just we're talking about it, we're having the conversation, and right at the beginning, Salesforce said, look, we know we're not going to get it right. Tell us, like, talk to us, like, what do you need, but what do you want? But more a case of let's open the conversation, let it not be a one-way, direction. Have a two-way conversation about all of these topics, and I really, really appreciate that. Always feel like you can talk to, my colleagues, my peers, but I can also go and, I feel like I could, I haven't, but email Mark Benioff, our co-founder and CEO, and give him my thoughts, because again, that's that sort of open conversation that I love, that I know that my friends at other companies don't have that liberty to do. So just that open.
Well, let's send Mark an email. But on that, I know we're running short of time. So my one thing will be like, this is all part of a journey, and I think lots of people take some inspiration from this, and really want to dig deeper. Then probably we have an opportunity to explore. So what's the way that people find out what's going on at Salesforce? If people are interested to kind of find out about more of your work or the culture, like where do people go now?
To find more specifically on the racial equality and justice work, you can go to equality.com. And you can also learn a lot about the specific actions and strategies and content that is available there. So I would recommend equality.com.
Fantastic. And I know if anybody's interested in kind of opportunities at Salesforce as well, within this wonderful platform that we have here called on Black Tech Fest, you can go to the Careers Hub, and there's lots of information. There's some wonderful colleagues I've been working with as well from the team at Salesforce who are available and really keen just to share what they're up to, whether that's a career or just wanting to be nosy about what happens in this big kind of organization too. So with that, I know we're coming up to time now. So I just want to say a massive thank you to Nathalie and Emma. Conversations like this don't happen without people putting in their time, without commitment, and ultimately the conviction to actually want to go and say, look, I'm publicly going to talk about what we're doing because I'm like George Foreman. I'm so proud of it. I put my name on it. I really do appreciate that. I really appreciate the time that they've put together on this, and Salesforce for being wonderful partners of Black Tech Fest as well. So do check it out. There'll be more to come, and we will definitely be shouting it as well. So I'd just like to say a massive thank you again.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, with that, please check out the rest of the agenda today. There's lots more great content as well, and please do check out the Salesforce Hub as well within the platform. But I'll leave that there. Thank you, everybody. Cheers.